So, today we're getting into a diagnosis that most of us reckon we understand: autism. But according to the book, A Blind Spot on Autism, there's a really tough and, to be honest, pretty controversial story playing out just beneath the surface. It's a story that doesn't begin with behaviour, but with biology. And to really grasp what this book is about, we're not kicking off with stats or graphs. No, we're starting with a single, incredibly powerful family story. That brings up a question most doctors just weren't asking. I want you to picture a typical Sunday lunch. The Kimberg family is at a Red Robin. It's noisy, it's cheerful. Their 3-year-old son, Sammy, is getting restless. And then all of a sudden, when the very last mozzarella stick gets taken, he pushes his chair back hard. There's this terrible crash, a hollow thud as his head hits a metal chair leg. The whole restaurant just goes dead quiet. His parents rush to his side and he's crying his eyes out. And it's all a blur of blood, napkins, and a mad dash to the emergency room. He ends up needing staples. And the thing is, this wasn't just some random one-off incident. This was their life. A constant state of emergency where the tiniest thing could set off a massive crisis. So this is way more than just a story about one bad day. It gets right to the heart of the book's main question. This isn't just about how to handle a meltdown. It's about asking why. Why is this child's brain and body always on such high alert, on edge all the time? Why is he so unsteady? And the author suggests that maybe, just maybe, the answers are somewhere completely different from where we've been looking. And it turns out this family's experience wasn't just some isolated thing. As the book's co-author, Debbie Kemberg, started connecting with other parents, she began to notice a much, much bigger pattern emerging, one that seemed to link health problems across entire families. You know, parents were telling the exact same story over and over again. It wasn't just that their child had an autism diagnosis. Nah, that was often just one piece of a much bigger health puzzle in the family. There was this whole cascade of other issues: autoimmune diseases, chronic fatigue, anxiety, miscarriages, ADHD, things that seemed totally separate, completely unrelated. Well, they started to look like they were all part of the same story. The book lays this out with family health histories that look a lot like what you see here. You follow the line from one generation to the next, and you might see an autoimmune disease in a grandmother. Then her daughter, the mother, struggles with chronic fatigue and pregnancy loss, and then her child is diagnosed with autism and PANS. Now, PANS, by the way, stands for Pediatric Acute Onset Neuropsychiatric Syndrome. That's a condition where an infection can set off these sudden, really dramatic behavioural changes, like OCD or severe anxiety. This kind of generational pattern really makes you wonder, what if something is being passed down? And maybe it's not just genetics. Maybe it's a shared underlying trigger. Okay, so let's get right into it, because this is the absolute core of the book's argument. What if that underlying trigger is a hidden, or what they call a stealth infection? You know, the kind that doesn't give you a fever and a cough, but instead just works quietly in the background, for years, maybe even for decades. Right. So unlike an acute infection like the flu, where you get sick, you feel awful, and then you get better, a stealth pathogen is designed for the long game. It actually hides inside your cells, in your tissues, dodging your immune system and causing these chronic, super confusing symptoms long, long after you were first exposed. And that, of course, makes it incredibly hard to connect the cause with the effect. The book zeroes in on a specific trio of these pathogens, and it calls them the 3 Bs. So first up, you've got Bartonella, which we often link to cat scratches. But guess what? It's also carried by ticks and fleas. Then there's Babesia, a parasite that's also transmitted by ticks. And finally, Borrelia, the one most of us have heard of. It's the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. And their strategy for survival is pretty brilliant, in a scary way. These things are masters of the skies. First, as you see in step 1, they literally hide inside the cells lining our blood vessels, or even inside our red blood cells. Then, for step 2, they create these protective shields around themselves called biofilms. It makes them super resistant to our immune system and to antibiotics. And finally, they can just pop in and out of the bloodstream, which is why they can cause symptoms that seem to come and go for no reason at all. So, okay, how does all of this circle back to the families we started with? Well, this is where the book argues that the symptoms have been there all along, they've just been filed under the wrong name. This quote from a parent just perfectly captures that stunning aha moment that the book describes. After years and years of searching for answers inside the world of autism, they stumble on information about these infections. And bam, suddenly everything just clicks into place. Now, this is what's really incredible. Just look at this overlap. So, on the left, you've got symptoms that are really common in autism and PANS. We're talking rage, sensory overload, sleep problems, brain fog, pics, OCD. Okay, now just trace your eye across those columns for the three Bs, especially that first one, Bartonella. You see check mark after check mark after check mark. The symptoms aren't just kind of similar. In a lot of these cases, they are identical. So, and this is a really crucial point, but the book is not saying that autism isn't real. What it's proposing is that for a subset of these individuals, the symptoms that we've been labeling as autism might actually be driven by an active treatable infection. For so many of these parents, this is the very first time that a biological explanation actually matched the full, complicated picture of what their child was going through. So, what would it mean if this hypothesis is true, even for a fraction of cases? The book argues it would demand a complete paradigm shift in how we think about autism research, diagnosis, and care. The authors lay out a really clear path forward. They call on for us to prioritise research into these infectious triggers, to develop tests that can actually find these sneaky microbes, and to start screening families that are at risk. But most importantly, they are advocating for a huge shift away from a model that only manages behaviours to a medical model that actually treats the underlying illness and then focuses on rehabilitation. And that leaves us all with the book's final and I think most profound question. If an infection's what's driving the symptoms, that means those symptoms could be treatable, and maybe, in some cases, even reversible. It really forces us to ask how many people are out there living with challenges they believe are permanent, when a completely different story of recovery might actually be possible.